When I was a little kid, this was pretty much my favorite Hot Wheel out of my entire Hot Wheel collection. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world to be able to customize or put parts on my Hot Wheels to make them look a little bit different. These things are pretty cool because the engine would pop up and you could put these big wheels on it. Came with stickers and a little jack stand little thing here. So actually, you know what? We're gonna open this bad boy. Oh yeah. Look at this little guy. I mean, pretty much everything about this Hot Wheel is amazing. Don't know exactly what year truck this is, but it would be like a Chevy GMC step-side style truck. Anyways, I didn't come here exactly to just play with Hot Wheels all day long, although that does sound pretty fun. What I did come here to do is talk about the differences between upgrades and some option parts for our RC cars, and hence this California custom, because sometimes the upgrades that we want to do to our RC cars, they may look cool and function, but when it comes to the performance side of things, it may not be something that would be super advantageous. For example, these big goofy slick tires. Anytime I would put these on the car and then send it down the Hot Wheel track, it would do significantly worse than if I took them off and I let it be its normal self. Enough with the Hot Wheel examples. Let's move on to talking about the RC stuff, shall we? Put an RC car in the frame. A little bit more appropriate, don't you think? I want to start this video off by saying, don't let what I say totally dictate what you do to your RC car. If you want to make this thing look like you dipped it in a bucket of candy red goodness and aluminumness, go for it. Who am I to say that you can't do that? If your goal is, however, to make these things go as fast as they possibly can in a competitive sense, well, that's a different story. There's going to be some things that we need to talk about and differentiate so that you can know what's going to be worth your hard-earned dollars to spend on this thing to make it go faster. If you want me to give you the quick and dry version of, Ryan, just tell me straight, what do I got to do to my car to make it go fast? I don't need all the sugar and spice and all the other stuff to go along with it. Well, if that's the case, easiest thing for you to do is find a current competitive either team driver or factory driver's setup sheet and see if they lay out a lot of the option parts that they've opted to use. It's a little bit difficult for me to speak on this in generalities across the board and apply it to every brand, every car, because there's going to be some things that will be very circumstantial, whether it's the track, the application, the vehicle, the components, etc. It can get very complex when we break it down to each individual vehicle. However, I want to highlight some of these general terms so that you'll at least be aware of these things, and maybe you will opt not to purchase some items and focus on other things that I will mention in today's video. When it comes to the world of racing, a lot of times I'll see something that's kind of like a carryover from the basher world, where every once in a while I'll browse through the Facebook marketplace and I'll stumble across some sort of like T-Max or some crazy basher that every single component on the vehicle is like blue anodized aluminum. Well, I guess that's kind of impressive and probably very expensive. That's not what we're going for with these RC racing vehicles. So this kind of brings me to my first point. Materials. Aluminum versus carbon fiber versus titanium, brass, graphite. There's a lot of different materials out there, but when these manufacturers design these vehicles, they use certain materials for different reasons. Let's start with looking at something like the shock towers. Probably the three most common materials that you're going to see for shock towers today is going to be a molded composite type tower, which is probably going to be on the lower end of desired materials. And then working our way into some of the more race-oriented stuff, you're going to see some carbon fiber towers, and then you're going to see some aluminum towers. Now, which tower you're going to use is ultimately going to depend on your vehicle and sometimes the track application itself. However, typically speaking, the carbon towers, you're going to see a little bit more of a flex characteristic, whereas the aluminum are going to be a little bit more rigid. Now, I'm not an expert, I don't develop these vehicles, but it's very common to see us use the aluminum towers on the 8 scale vehicles. Probably for a couple reasons. It keeps the flex component a little bit more to a minimum so that the suspension is going to work a little bit harder, and it is a little bit more durable. Now, however, I have used carbon towers on an 8 scale vehicle before, specifically because I was trying to generate a little bit more flex throughout the whole vehicle and just generate some more overall grip. But like I said, that might be driver preference, track preference, vehicle specific, all the different reasons could go on and on and on. Is it typically across the board, generally speaking, are you trying to make these things super beefy aluminum towers? Always. The answer is definitely no. Look at those factory setup sheets, see what the fast guys are using. If they're using an option aluminum tower, well then try it, see if it works for you. If they're opting to take the aluminum towers off and put the carbon ones on, see where they were doing it. Why were they doing it? Are towers an upgrade or an option part? I'm probably going to lean more towards an option part. See what the vehicle needs and what the track needs on top of that. Now, moving on from the towers, let's talk about some titanium parts. Most of the kits out there today are going to come with like a black steel style screw. Oftentimes it's a very common upgrade for different reasons to switch them out for a titanium screw. This can be a little bit pricey of an upgrade. Typically these are not going to be option parts with most of the manufacturers. I think I've seen some from time to time have an OEM branded titanium option set, but from what I've seen, they're typically not as good as the third-party titanium screw sets that are out there if they're available for your vehicle. The benefits of switching to a titanium screw set is going to be removing some of the weight that would be kind of on top of or throughout the vehicle, and if you find yourself racing in some outdoor scenarios, sometimes that dirt can have corrosive properties and the titanium screws aren't going to rust like your steel style screws. Now you might be asking, well, what about those stainless steel screw kits? If your only goal is to reduce the amount of kind of corrosion that's going on in the vehicle, then sure, that might not be a terrible option. But if you're going to be going through the vehicle and doing an upgrade, I would definitely suggest working towards a titanium screw kit because you get the benefit of reducing weight and you do get the benefit of reducing any sort of potential corrosion that would go on with your screws. So titanium screws, definitely an upgrade. Hopefully they have a kit available for your vehicle, but the only con there is that it's going to be a little bit on the pricey side for those titanium screw kits. Another great upgrade that I would suggest is looking into some titanium turnbuckles. This is another way to save a significant amount of weight, and it does have a little bit more of a rigid or bend resistant component than your steel style turnbuckles. Titanium turnbuckles, definitely suggested upgrade. Okay, now let's talk about some of the more less common or obscure kind of third-party upgrades that I've seen out there. Guys coming over from the basher world. Actually, I'll give you a real world example. So I was at one of my local tracks and we were racing out there. He was in the independent or the beginner class and he was running his 2-wheel drive buggy. His car wasn't doing as good as he thought it should be. So he was trying to work on the setup throughout the day. So he comes up to me and he says, "Hey Ryan, the car just isn't steering how I want it to." I was like, okay, is it pushing or is it steering too much? Which one is it? He's like, "I don't know, it just doesn't feel right." Okay, do you want it to steer more or less? He's like, "Well, what I'm thinking is I don't have one of those aluminum bulkheads up in the front." And he's referring to like the whole kind of like front area, just making it aluminum instead of composite. And I was kind of scratching my head and I was like, I don't know of anyone that runs an aluminum bulkhead. You know, what makes you think that that's going to be the ticket? And he's like, "Well, it's better. So if I get that in there, it'll definitely help the front end." My brain was kind of hurting at this moment. I was really trying to figure out a way to be nice because I could tell that this guy was a little bit newer. He didn't really know the things that were common practice when it comes to what we do to the front end of those vehicles to get them to behave a certain way. Basically anything else in the front end as far as changing a setting or an adjustment, a spring, shock oil, a piston, stroke length, ball stud location. There's a million different things in there that you should do instead of thinking about changing that front bulkhead to aluminum. This is something where I would say that it is technically marketed as an upgrade, but it's definitely not something that is a common practice with the guys that are on the team or the factory team drivers. That material and the geometry and the mechanics of how that part was designed it develops a specific feel or flex factor or a lot of other things that I'm probably not smart enough to explain. And it's definitely not something that's going to be a common upgrade for the front of this vehicle. Now, if you found yourself where you are working on your driving skills and you're trying to reduce the number of crashes and things that you're breaking in the vehicle on an average race day, and let's just say that that front bulkhead is something that you're breaking almost every single day. Somehow, some way, if that's the scenario, maybe an aluminum bulkhead would benefit you so that you're not breaking it every single day. But a part like that in that location, I would definitely say is not going to be a common upgrade or option part for most of the vehicles out there. Save your dollars, buy more tires. That would be my suggestion. Now, these things can get kind of tricky because there's a lot of different parts, like this buggy, for example, the front pivot block, that you can get in composite, aluminum, or brass. You can get them in all kinds of different materials. The desired effect there is more of a weight bias than it is anything else. The plastic one being the lightest, the brass being the heaviest. Those kind of options are going to be something that is common when we're trying to adjust the feel of the car. That's not something that I would typically play with from a durability standpoint. Big bulkhead type related aluminum parts. Is it an upgrade or an option part? I typically would suggest neither. Looks cool to some, but usually isn't the way to go. I probably should have started with this right off of the bat. Now, after you've been running your vehicle for a little while and maybe you're going through it, getting ready to do a rebuild, that would be a perfect time to go ahead and upgrade your bearings. Most of the cars out there today I've seen have bearings that are decent. They're not terrible, but they're usually packed with a little bit of grease. They're not super fast spinning bearings. They're more or less designed to last a long time and keep dirt out. In the world of hyper competitive 1/10 scale racing, a set of really nice bearings can make a huge difference when it comes to things like overall speed, runtime, sometimes like running temps of the electronics. And that's a relatively easy upgrade to do. Depending on the type of bearing kit that you need or how fancy of a bearing kit you get, they can be a little bit pricey. They can run anywhere from like 50 to 100 bucks, depending on the ceramic and how many of them there are. Bearings are definitely an excellent upgrade. So at this point, you may be asking me, Ryan, is there anything that I can just upgrade for fun just because I want it to look different, like colors and incorporate something from my paint scheme? Because if it's all just straightforward performance related stuff, then that just sounds really boring. Well, okay, hang on. There's a little bit of stuff that you can do when it comes to incorporating something like a fun color. Easiest way to do something like that is to change out some of those aluminum nuts. There's a lot of companies out there that will kind of brand their own versions of aluminum screws, but honestly, it's probably all the same stuff that comes from China in big batch orders. These can come in all the different sizes, the M3 size, M4, some of the more obscure sizes, maybe in your steering geometry. That's a perfect, easy way to do something that really isn't gonna have that much of a handling difference, but it will incorporate a cool color. Super easy upgrade or option part? I'd say it's both. It's kind of an option part because it's technically the same type of part and it just is a different color. So sure, cool upgrade. Another thing that I've seen some guys do, and it's definitely up to personal taste, is changing the color of their electronic wires. I'm kind of a plain Jane kind of guy. I just like running the black style wiring. I change it to 13 gauge wire more often than not because it's a little bit lighter than 12 gauge stuff and, you know, spec racer things. But you can get that in probably white, red, yellow, blue, all kinds of different colors. So if you want to change that and have it match your paint scheme, you can swap out your wires. So upgrade or an option part, I'd say it's more of like a option color thing. Do it if you want. I don't. So that's most of the big upgrades and option parts that are pretty common amongst these vehicles. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of stuff that's different, or I didn't even mention it because it's a vehicle that I don't know a lot about, or I didn't even know that option or upgrade part existed. So if there's something that you race and a vehicle that you have, and there's something that you saw made a huge difference and made your car go faster or be more consistent, drop it in a comment down below. I'd love to see what you guys are using out there and the upgrade and option parts that you like to use. And of course, before we wrap up, I have to give a huge shout out to everyone over on my Patreon, everyone up on the screen. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. I really appreciate it. And of course, I need to give a huge special shout out to all of my top tier supporters, starting with Brandon Helton, Robert Black, Tim Juskiewicz, Brad Persons, and of course, Alex Johnson. Thank you guys, I appreciate it. It rolls so terrible when you put all this stuff on, but it looks cool. That's all that matters. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Peace. Yeah, you gotta hear the snap. It's just all the little sounds, you know? Oh, yeah. Good stuff. I'm gonna go play with my Hot Wheels now.